that we're gonna skip that 8 p.m. thing and just go, like, as soon as that's over, then go to Maryland package. Like the show open, like once I open the show. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Who did?
I don't know. XX wings sword XX. 30 seconds. Yeah, it's been 15 minutes. No, mine's off. Just make sure that your sound is off.
Good evening, I'm Jane Caroline Fusco. Thanks for joining us for our special election coverage. We will be with you for the next 3 hours or so with the latest election results, along with reports from D.C., Virginia, Maryland, and some of the swing states such as Pennsylvania and Georgia. We will even check in with a partner university in England to see how they're covering the U.S. election. Now, the big topic this time around is the presidential election, and right now the AP has projected 95 votes for Donald Trump and 35 for Kamala Harris. We have seen some interesting results so far coming from Florida. Only 89% of the votes are counted, and they have projected that as well. In Alabama, only 0% of the votes have been counted, and yet the AP is projecting that Donald Trump will win that state. In the northeastern part of the U.S., we have Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Maryland, our nearby neighbor, that have all been called for Kamala Harris. Now, let's turn over to Julianne Sheehan, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what's going on in Virginia. Julianne?
Thank you, Jane. So tonight, as the polls have predicted for the last few weeks leading up to the election, Vice President Kamala Harris is ahead of Trump in the state. Right now, she has 50.4% of the vote, while the former president has 47.9%. Now, this is only with 32% of the vote counted, but as you can see behind me, she is currently ahead. There are also some other important elections up for grabs in the state of Virginia. We have a U.S. Senate seat, which the incumbent Tim Kaine is running for alongside retired Navy Captain Hung Cao. Currently, similarly, with 32% of the votes counted, Kaine has 52.6% and is still ahead of his opponent. There are also 11 House seats that are up for grabs. Out of those 11, only one have been counted, U.S. District 8, where Donald Byer has won with 69% of the vote. Of those 11, 5 are leaning Democratic, while the other 6 are leaning Republican. We will update you as some more things come in from the AP. Back to you, Jane.
Thanks, Julianne. Tonight, Maryland voters could elect a Republican senator for the first time in 41 years. Teddy Carr and Gus Romanow have the story.
I believe I'm going to vote for Hogan. I believe he's more of a concentric, proven candidate.
It's a mixed bag in Maryland, a historically blue state. During this election cycle, former Governor Larry Hogan is now in the running for a seat in the Senate, competing with former Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks.
Hogan was not a horrible governor, but the Republicans right now seem to have lost their collective way.
While polls show Alsobrooks in the lead, Hogan has overperformed in the past with his surprising 2014 win as governor of Maryland. With his centrist leanings and bipartisan ideals, he proves to be a fierce competitor for Alsobrooks.
I've met Larry Hogan, who's the Republican runner, whatever, and he's quite lovely. He's actually one of the only Republicans that I would even consider voting for, but he has a lot of like anti-abortion stances, so I would never, ever vote for that.
But Alsobrooks holds traction with Democratic voters. Some voters say they are casting a ballot for Alsobrooks because of her views on women's health care and reproductive rights.
I think where I'm at, like I'm the single platform voter, and it's women's health and women's rights.
While Hogan has stated his support for the reinstitution of Roe v. Wade, he's also argued against efforts to end the congressional filibuster that would allow a bill reinstating the protections of Roe. But regardless of who Maryland voters choose in the election, voters also say that this race is key in the state's representation in the federal government.
And a senator has a lot to do with the direction of the country. Just rational thought on the issues, listening to experts, address the issues in a way that reflects who put her in office.
For District Wire News, I'm Teddy Carr.
And I'm Augustus Romano.
In the state of Pennsylvania, everyone is paying attention to the presidential election. The Keystone State has 19 electoral votes, the most of any swing state. I spoke to voters in Pittsburgh who are feeling that pressure. In the final hours of their presidential campaigns, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump held rallies in the heart of Pittsburgh.
That's a big group of people.
Pittsburgh! The Wall Street Journal recently named Pittsburgh the center of the political universe. For voters like Megan Chase, they're proud to vote in a monumental election.
It really feels like your vote is going to count. You know, we're in a swing state. Your vote is actually going to matter. It's going to push, towards one way or the other.
Gen Z is a huge target for both campaigns, and young Pennsylvanians are enjoying the attention.
I gotta feel important.
Some voters like Tommy Berenson say they're feeling the weight of responsibility as they recognize the power of their vote.
I have friends and family who are part of the LGBTQ community who I really want to make sure that they have those equal rights, that they have equal opportunities in the world.
But for others like Casey Brown, this election feels personal.
Project 2025 and even in the mainstream Republican platform, they have called for the removal of transgender care and abortion from TRICARE coverage, meaning I would lose my health insurance and be forced to detransition. I need Kamala Harris to win to continue being myself.
Whatever issue is driving them to the polls, the voters I spoke with had one consistent message. They're grateful to have their voices heard.
Our generation should get out and vote because it's our future, respectfully.
No matter what side you're on, I believe that everybody truly, you should get out and vote. It's a civic responsibility, let alone just something that I would say it's a privilege. It's something so wonderful about living in a democracy. More than 85 million ballots, have already been cast in the state weeks before the election. But poll workers can't begin counting all of those votes until the polls closed at 8 p.m. Turning to ballot measures, here in D.C., Initiative 85, if passed, would allow D.C.'s 76,000 registered independents to vote in a partisan primary election of their choosing. The mayor is against it, but reporter Ella Robinson found support for the measure at the polls today.
You voted for me? Thank you so much.
I'm here reporting at Chevy Chase Community Centre, one of the more popular polling stations in the area. It's very busy here with a lot of the ANC commissioners waiting outside, chatting to the local community. There's also 2 members of the Vote Yes on Initiative 83 campaign. Initiative 83 is one of the issues on the ballot today in DC. It's a ballot initiative that would allow independents to vote in primaries, making them semi-open, and for ranked choice voting, which means someone would need at least 50% of the vote to be elected. There's varying opinions for and against this issue, and I'll be speaking to people today to find out what they think.
Ultimately, voting is our way of conveying authority. This person will be our leader for the next period of time. Think of being the second choice president. It's a sort of weird way to convey authority, right? And so I'm concerned about it for that, so I'll be voting against it.
I think it's great. I think that the threshold of having 50% of the vote in order for someone to win is really important in DC, especially because we've had people who have won with 23% of the vote, which means that 77% of people voted for someone else. And so that doesn't make sense
in my opinion.
A couple years ago, we had a Ward 3 council primary, and one of the things was I vote early, and so I had voted early and people had dropped out of the race, and I was a little bit upset. So if we had the option of ranking people, you know, if I had voted for someone who dropped out, then my mind could have went down the list.
Minority communities will have a lot more attention from candidates than they would otherwise. Communities like mine, Asian Americans, South Asian Americans, immigrant communities, they all will be spoken to more. They'll have more attention given to them. Maybe candidates will care to translate their campaign materials.
We really believe this has little to do about D.C. Voters. It has a lot to do about outside special interest groups and PACs meddling in D.C. politics. They've raised $1.5 million, with over 80% of that coming from special interest groups like Unite America, All One God's Faith Inc., Fair Action Vote, PAC. These are not D.C.-based organizations, and they're meddling in D.C. politics, and we are saying no to that.
A few larger organizations who are funding our campaign, a lot of like social action teams, so like Fair Vote, which is right over the border in Silver Spring. It's barely outside D.C. These are people who are really interested in furthering democracy, and they give us the opportunity to hire people to work within D.C.
For District-wide News, I'm Ella Robinson.
We'll take a quick break, and when we return, we'll update you with the latest presidential numbers, and we'll take you around D.C. for more election coverage. Stay with us. This special live edition of District Wire News for election night. In the final days of her campaign, Vice President Kamala Harris made her closing argument in the heart of the district. More than 75,000 spectators gathered downtown to hear that speech. ATV's Ashley Totten spoke to attendees at the event.
Vice President Kamala Harris held one of her final rallies in D.C. in front of the White House. The line to get into the event stretched for over a mile. According to the Harris campaign, more than 70,000 people gathered to hear Harris speak. To some voters, like Mary Beth Hastings, Harris represents hope and a future of change.
She is someone who cares about everyone in America. She cares about good decision making. She will defend our rights, our reproductive rights.
Others say they have some reservations about Harris.
I'm hoping that she gives us more insight on what's her whole plan, her economic plan, immigration, all of those different things.
Harris did highlight some of her plans, which include cutting taxes for the middle class, a federal ban on price gouging for groceries, capping prescription drug prices, and creating more affordable housing, among other things. Harris also compared herself to Trump, calling him a, quote, petty tyrant, and noting that the ellipse is where Trump spoke on January 6, 2021. Some of her supporters say it's time to turn the page on Trump.
Trump, she said, make America great again. She will make America better, greater than it is right now. And I believe that strongly with all of my heart.
Harris ended the night with a call to unity and bipartisanship, saying she pledges to be a president for all Americans and to always put country above party and above self. For District Wire News, I'm Ashley Topham.
It's now after 8:30 p.m. Just one state, Arkansas, had its polls close at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. But let's take a look at the presidential race so far. Now, we just had a couple calls on the AP website. So right now, Donald Trump is sitting at 101 electoral college votes, and Kamala Harris is sitting at 59. Now, in the last few seconds, Kamala Harris did win New Jersey, which has 14 electoral college votes. Donald Trump, just a few minutes ago, was projected to win Arkansas with its 6 electoral college votes. Earlier this morning, we're looking at Georgia right now, where not everything has been counted so far, but it is looking pretty exciting there, and that it's going to be a tight race. Right now, Donald Trump is leading there with about 52% of the votes. It looks like Kamala Harris just won their electoral college vote, but Donald Trump did win Florida, which is not a surprise, but only about 91% of the votes were counted. Now, let's talk a little bit more about our local elections. Earlier this morning, Ashley Totten went to the polls in Tenleytown to talk to voters about their experience. Ashley, how were people feeling about voting?
Thanks, Jane. I went to Tenleytown when the polls opened this morning to talk to DC residents. They felt this election was different from previous years, but were proud to be exercising their right to vote.
The polls in Washington, D.C. opened at 7 this morning. Many were up bright and early to vote.
I chose the most convenient place for me to vote during the day before the work day started. Yeah.
I'm here outside the Tenleytown Library. It's 8 a.m. and voters are dropping their ballots into the drop-in box behind me. Just up the street is Janney Elementary School, where D.C. residents in Ward 3 are casting their ballots and doing what they feel is their civic duty.
I'm an American. It's my duty and my privilege to vote.
It's our civic responsibility to get out and express our opinions by voting.
There are also other divisive factors driving people to the polls. Chris Oster, a D.C. resident, says climate change is the most important issue for him.
I think it's sort of the defining issue of every living thing on Earth, not just humans, but animals, everything else.
Vice President Kamala Harris is a former alumni of Howard University, and many Howard students say they're excited to vote for her in the presidential election. ATV's Sean Mimon headed over to the HBCU to talk to students.
Being counted. Howard University, a historically black college in Washington, has been an important center for her throughout her presidential campaign. She formally announced her 2019 presidential campaign at the university. She also camped out at the HBCU during her debate prep. When Harris attended the university, she ran her first campaign to become a freshman class representative. Harris has also said how important the university was to her identity and her desire to become a lawyer. Students at Howard are excited to cast their ballot for the Howard alum and are praising her determination to win the election.
Honestly, I admire her greatly for her campaign. She talks about a lot of prominent issues that is going on, and with all that is going on right now, especially with the termination of Roe v. Wade, there's a lot of unsureness going on in the community when it comes to being black, being a woman, and just future children, and I feel like she provides that confidence in giving that back to us.
Students like Jonathan Davis also say that he's proud to attend a university that has created powerful and influential national leaders.
I think it's actually very great. It's giving a lot more representation into the school, especially that she went to Howard, giving it all the famous people that went here, such as Thurgood Marshall, Chadwick Boseman. I think it's actually very good that Kamala Harris actually went there. It gives like a lot more representation of like the prestige that Howard has, and I definitely just think moving forward, it will bring the school more into like a better light to see like how these students can basically turn into just better, just like more educated, like young black men and women going into the future.
For District Wire News, I'm Sean Memon.
Foreign policy has the potential to sway young voters in this election. After more than a year of war in Gaza, some members of Generation Z say they will use their vote in protest of U.S. support for Israel. Your reporter Bea Barbosa has the story. Let's actually take a look at the presidential election vote so far. We actually have let's take a look at those votes actually. So it looks like Illinois was just called for President Kamala Harris. Looking at some of the other states that we have not seen yet, over in Texas, we have about 51% of the votes counted so far, so we definitely are in for a long night. Right now, we're looking at 71 electoral votes for Kamala Harris projected right now, and 101 for Donald Trump at this moment. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll update you with the latest presidential numbers, and we'll hear about the Women's March. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Let's take a quick look over at the presidential race so far tonight. Now, we have early election results, 71 electoral votes for Kamala Harris to 101 for Donald Trump. Now, I just told you earlier, but let's remind you again that so far Illinois, Maryland, New Jersey, Delaware, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Vermont have all been called for Kamala Harris. For Donald Trump, we have Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Now, the ones that we're starting to take a look at a little bit closer, one of those is Texas. Right now, we have about 51% of the votes counted, and right now Donald Trump has a slim lead there. Another one that we're taking a look at is Georgia. Now, that only has 53% of the votes counted. They were actually able to start counting those ballots earlier today, so that could be a little bit why we're seeing those kinds of numbers coming from the state already. We have Donald Trump at a 9% lead right there. Now, another one that we're looking at is Pennsylvania. Only 12% of the votes have been counted so far. Right now, Kamala Harris is winning in that state, but we're definitely going to have to wait for those because those mail-in ballots could only be opened earlier when the polls closed at 8 p.m., like 45 minutes ago. Now, we are going to talk about some of the issues. Thousands of people gathered in D.C. for the Women's March this past weekend. Oni Shader was at the rally and joins us now in studio. Oni, what did these attendees have to say?
Thanks, Jane. Yes, crowds of people flooded the streets of D.C. to express their concerns on reproductive health care issues. They urged people to cast their vote for a candidate that will protect a woman's right to an abortion. On the weekend before Election Day, supporters of presidential candidate Kamala Harris rallied at the Women's March in D.C. March attendees specifically brought the right to a safe and legal abortion to the forefront. This has also been a key focus of Harris's campaign. Attendees gathered at Freedom Plaza before marching down Pennsylvania Avenue in support of Harris. Attendees say they want undecided voters to know what's at stake.
Women's lives are at stake. I mean, people are bleeding out. That's it. Like, you either care or you don't care about women's lives.
Attendees also mentioned how important candidates' stances on abortion rights are in the election since the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
I am a doula and lactationist, and as a birth worker, I believe that women should have what they need to protect them to have safe delivery.
Harris supporters also believe that Harris's dedication for protecting abortion rights makes her the right candidate.
Kamala Harris is the person of choice for me because she realizes the women issues, and I think that she's going to fight strongly for our rights.
With trust in Harris's campaign promises, activists are hoping to see real change in how the government protects access to reproductive health care in America.
There should be access to clinics, and from the lowest level of just having access to birth control pills to the highest level of, if you have some emergency.
For District Wire News, I'm Oni Chater.
Lydia, can you switch something to? Let's look at our nearby neighbor Virginia's results so far. Let's toss it over to Bea Barbosa, who's going to give us a little rundown on what's happening over there. Bea?
Hi. Thanks, James. So I'm actually going to be looking at Maryland real quick, another one of our neighbors. And right now, there have been less than 1% of the votes counted. So AP is saying that it's 0%, although there has been some votes counted. And as of right now, it's looking like Larry Hogan, former governor of Maryland, it has the lead, although again, it is such a small amount of votes that have been counted at this moment that this really doesn't mean much. But taking a look at this race, this could be a historic race for either candidate that wins. Larry Hogan would be the first Republican to win Maryland Senate seat in 30 years, and Angela Alsobrooks, the Democratic candidate, would be the first black woman to be a senator for the state. So it'll be an exciting race no matter what, and we'll keep you updated. Back to you, Jane.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that slip up, everyone. Well, we are talking about the presidential race yet again. This is the big ticket that everyone is paying attention to for this year's election. So we're still sitting at 71 to 101. We have more polls closing at 9 p.m. But taking a look, it looks like Kansas has started counting its votes so far. We have about 28% of the votes counted there. Right now it's leaning towards Kamala Harris. But then taking a look at some of the other southern states, North Carolina has been a huge target this year to try and swing it towards the Democrats. But so far, right now, only 23% of those votes are being counted right now, and Donald Trump has about a 6% lead right now. We're still waiting on some of those other states for those polls to be closed. Taking a look at Maine right now, surprisingly, Donald Trump looks like he has the lead right now, but we're gonna turn it over now to the Senate races where we have both a Maryland and Virginia election going on right there. In U.S. Senate, we have Senator Tim Kaine, who is gonna be running, and in Maryland, we have, excuse me, so sorry. Let's take a look at the Senate races right now. Right now, the Republicans are at 43 seats, while the Democrats are sitting at 34. There are 28 in office, which means that 23 now have to be called. We can see that in Florida, Mississippi, Tennessee, those are all states that have been called for Republican senators. Now we're still waiting for Pennsylvania and Virginia, which are nearby neighbors and swing states. So we'll continue to keep looking at those where Bob Casey did get the majority. So let's turn it now to some of the new voters that we might have seen this year. This year's election is bringing a new generation of voters to the polls. Ellie Knudsen reports on how young voters are feeling.
Thank you, Jane. I went and spoke to several young voters down at both Kamala Harris's rally and on our own AU campus. They had a lot to say about the direction the election is going, including many opinions on whether or not they thought that their favored candidate was going to win the election.
Political atmosphere right now is really bad, just because we're so divided. It's kind of easier job to vote for who you think is better, but it's just not a good environment to be in right now. We're very divided.
I'm here now at Kamala Harris's rally, where, as you can see, there's already quite a crowd behind me. The first time voters I spoke to were Americans to say that their civic duties, the election results drawing out closer, only time will tell what kind of impact this generation will have.
I would say climate change is an important issue, as well as voting access is something that's super important, and how to ensure that people are still going to be able to vote in the future and have it as easy and accessible as possible.
I've heard it's like everyone. Older, 21, I'm officially a legal adult. I had the opportunity, and being black, a black male, having this opportunity to vote is very important. With what I will be doing, buying houses in the future, getting jobs in the future, everything 4 years between 21 and 25 now is very important.
For District Wire News, I'm Ellie Knudsen.
Ellie also headed to a polling place in Eastern Market. Ellie, what did voters have to say there?
Thanks, Jane. I headed there before the polls closed this morning and talked to voters after they had cast their ballot. Many of them wanted to look toward the future.
Others say they believe a more critical approach needs to be taken when choosing a candidate.
But I think it's important that people don't base their decision on a single issue. It's actually single issue voting is something I think can get you and can get the country into a lot of trouble. I think it's finding someone who you agree with the most, not that you agree with in one specific area.
Here at the Eastern Market polling location, voters have been lining up for quite some time already.
People we've spoken to say they're feeling pretty secure about their voting choices and see voting as a very important duty.
It's important. We need all the voices, and the more diverse voices speak out, the better.
The ability of us to sustain our democracy is truly
The audio issues on that story, but we're going to take a quick break and see what's going on there, and we'll be right back.
With like 1,000 votes, it's 0 votes, and it's already called.
They just know.
They just, yeah.
The one person living there.
Iowa is also still at 0%.
Here, but you can't hear.
We can use voting as a tool. We can use non-voting as a tool.
1 week before Election Day, over 70,000 people gathered in D.C. to see Vice President Kamala Harris make her closing argument. Among them were protesters, giving her an ultimatum.
Until there's a ceasefire or an arms embargo, they're not going to get the votes.
The race for president is neck and neck, with Harris and Trump polling just under 50%, meaning this protest vote could potentially have an impact on the outcome of the election. But some young voters are planning to cast their ballots, just not for Harris or Trump.
I think I have a really unique opportunity to use my vote to send a message.
Lily Elkind is from Manhattan, New York, a deep blue stronghold. Elkind says she is confident that her third-party vote won't lose Harris the election, but could still show her that change can't wait.
There's pressure that it's not a given, that just because she's not Donald Trump doesn't mean that she can, get away with not pushing the envelope.
For others, not agreeing with candidates on every issue wasn't enough to keep them from voting.
As much as I did sort of want to protest vote, I realized it wasn't that simple. I couldn't have been that selfish. I have a sister, I have a mom, a lot of my friends are women. Like, abortion is a major issue for me.
Bea Barbosa, District Wire News. The same question. How do you feel about the 2024 presidential election? Resulted in a mix of emotions for these Gen Zers.
Worried, very conflicted.
Apprehensive, but I'm also excited to cast my vote.
The one thing they have in common, none are enthusiastic about their options. From the economy to abortion, these young voters say they care about a range of issues. But for some, one issue tops the list.
Like, all the issues that they're talking about are important, yes, but I feel like genocide's important. It should be the most important, above all.
Third-party vote won't lose Harris the election, but could still show her that change can't wait.
There's pressure that it's not a given, that just because she's not Donald Trump doesn't mean that she can, get away with not pushing the envelope.
For others, not agreeing with candidates on every issue wasn't enough to keep them from voting.
As much as
I did sort of want to protest vote. I realized it wasn't that simple. I couldn't have been that selfish. I have a sister, I have a mom, a lot of my friends are women. Like, abortion is a major issue for me.
Bea Barbosa, District Wire News.
Welcome back to District Wire News. We're a little bit past 9 p.m., so that means more state polling locations have closed. 15 states just closed their polls, including the battleground states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona. Let's take a look at those latest presidential numbers. So right now we're taking a look at 99 to 137, with some more states being called since the last time that we came here. We're looking at Louisiana, Oklahoma, Nevada, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Wyoming have all been projected for Trump. Now, taking a look, New York was also just recently called for Kamala Harris, with only 17% of the votes actually counted. So that's going to be an interesting thing to look at. We're looking at Illinois as well, has also been called for Kamala Harris with 19 electoral votes. Now, we have more polls to see. We have Ohio was just called, just got that in right now with 52% of the votes counted, so that's being projected right now. But thinking a little bit more locally, Maryland was called for Kamala Harris earlier in this evening, but D.C. Is also part of there. So earlier this morning, Ellie Knudsen headed to a polling place in Eastern Market. Ellie, what did voters there have to say about why they were taking the time to vote?
Thanks, Jane. Well, I headed there before the polls closed and talked to voters after they had cast their ballot. Many of them wanted to look toward the future.
At Eastern Market's North Hall,
voters are lined up to cast their ballots for the 2024 election. Voters say that they feel this vote holds more weight than previous years and expressed concerns about America's future.
I am feeling it is every American's responsibility to get out and vote because this election is crucial to our future.
We have a daughter who just recently graduated college. I'm very much worried about the future for her, and voting is a chance to at least say what we want.
Others say they believe a more critical approach needs to be taken when choosing a candidate.
But I think it's important that people don't base their decision on a single issue. It's actually single issue voting is something I think can get you and can get the country into a lot of trouble. I think it's finding someone who you agree with the most, not that you agree with in one specific area.
Here at the Eastern Market polling location, voters have been lining up for quite some time already. People we've spoken to say they're feeling pretty secure about their voting choices and see voting as a very important duty.
It's important. We need all the voices, and the more diverse voices speak out, the better.
The ability of us to sustain our democracy is truly under threat. If we want a democracy, we have to elect leaders who believe in democracy and put all this silliness and hatred and divisiveness aside.
For District Wire News, I'm Ellie Knutson.
Well, one important battleground state is Georgia with 16 electoral college vote. Right now, only about 68% of the votes are in right now. And earlier today, our Brandon Smith was in Atlanta, Georgia, another important city in that state. He joins us now in studio. Brandon, what did you see there this morning?
That's right, Jane. Voters were lined up this morning at 7 a.m. before they headed to work, but the lines weren't too long. Georgia voters were at the polls bright and early this morning to cast their ballots. Voters cited a number of issues that drove them to the polls.
I don't want anyone to be able to tell me what to do with my body. I also think that it is important that we have people who are of ethical characteristics to be running the country.
I have 2 toddlers, so I'm constantly thinking about their future. Like, are we creating a good world for them? Are we creating opportunities for them? Are we considering people's health and people's bodies and all those things?
Georgia is one of several battleground states that is sure to determine the next U.S. president. The state flipped blue last election cycle, but this time around, it looks to be anyone's race.
I believe that we're going to keep hope alive and that Kamala Harris will win the presidency. I know that it's been very close and things have been really high with the tension, but I have faith that good will outweigh evil.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little anxious. I mean, after January 6th, you just don't really know how things will shake out. So I'm curious, I'm hopeful, but also a little nervous about the reaction of the people who are excited about the results.
Both Trump and Harris took to Georgia the last weekend before the election in hopes of swaying Election Day voters.
You have to stand up and tell Harris that you've had enough. You can't take it anymore. You're the worst vice president in the history of our country.
As of 5 days ago, CNN polls had Trump leading Harris 48 to 47% in the state. I'm Brandon Smith, District Wire News.
Megastar superstar Taylor Swift made headlines earlier this campaign when she publicly supported Kamala Harris for president. Soon after, former President Donald Trump tweeted, "I hate Taylor Swift." That's when an informal group of fans calling themselves Swifties for Kamala swung into action. They hope to raise $13,000 for the campaign. By today, they have raised $235,000. Here's an interview with the executive director, Irene Tim.
We've raised over $222,000 for the campaign. You know, when we first started, when we were setting the goal and we had our Act Blue page, we were like, oh, like, what should our goal be? 13,000? Is that too high? And now, you know, we've been raising the number and running out of Taylor-related numbers to use, you know, like, that's crazy. We've had thousands of bracelets distributed across over 50 states, so that's incredible. And just, I think the most the greatest thing for me has been the individual interactions I've had with people, whether it's someone telling me that their sister-in-law or best friend is a Republican, but they are voting for Kamala Harris because they are a Swiftie and they're a Swiftie for Kamala. And we're also going to organize around providing resources around, how to vote or like what you need to know about your rights. The same way we provide resources about, okay, here's the best way to secure a ticket, during this upcoming drop. We're used to sharing information together as a community. And so now instead of doing it around Taylor, we're doing it around voting and this election. And I think it's helped make it really accessible. For me as a woman of color and my co-founder as a trans Latinx man, like it was just really critical for us to make sure, it's our own rights, it's the rights of our friends and family, and just about making sure we get to live in a country where we're not afraid for our literal lives every day.
We're going to take another break, and when we return, we'll update you with the presidential race, and we'll hear about the Women's March. Stay with us. District Wire News, we have some updates in the presidential election. Texas was just called for President Donald Trump. Now, we're looking at that state has 40 electoral votes, which is a huge win for the former president, with only 58% of the votes being counted right now. We're looking at an interesting night for that team, I'm sure. But in other news, if you're paying attention, California has 54 electoral votes and their polls haven't even closed yet. They haven't even started counting that. So that is one comparison just to make in terms of that. In Georgia, we're now projecting that 70% of the votes have been counted and no projections have been made from the AP. Right now in Pennsylvania, only 22% of the votes have been counted. Right now, Kamala Harris is leading in the state, but it is certainly going to be a long night. In Colorado and New Mexico, Kansas, they've started to count those votes, but it's not going to be something that comes to us very easily since their polls just closed a few minutes ago. Now we're going to turn over to Julianne Sheehan, who's going to give us a rundown on the Virginia elections and what's going on over there. Julianne.
Thank you, Jane. So in Virginia currently, Trump is leading Harris. He has 49.6% of the vote, while Harris has 48.6. So this is something that the polls weren't really predicting tonight. However, a lot of the districts that are in are conservative districts, while states, the more liberal districts in the area, haven't been called yet. So we are looking to see a switch later on in the night. We also just got in a few seconds ago that in U.S. House District 3, Robert Scott, the incumbent, has won against John Sitka. Scott got 69.3% of the votes. And we also had a couple more of the House races be called. We have Ben Cline, who won against his opponent, Ken Mitchell. Cline is the incumbent and a Republican and won 65.3% of the vote. We also have Morgan Griffith, a Republican and incumbent in the seat, wins 63.9% of the vote against Karen Baker. And to the Senate election, we have Tim Kaine still leading ahead of Hung Kao with 51.3% of the vote. Now this is with 51% of the vote counted. And if any comedy fans out there tuned into SNL, Kaine did make an appearance in which he made a joke of himself for not being that memorable as Hillary Clinton's running mate in 2016. Since then, Hung Kao has said that Kaine acted poorly in making himself a human punching bag instead of focusing on the electorate in his state. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Julianne. Foreign policy has the potential to sway young voters in this election. After a year of war in Gaza, some members of Generation Z say they will use their voice to vote in protest to U.S. support for Israel. Your reporter, Bea Barbosa, has that story.
How do you feel about the 2024 presidential election? Resulted in a mix of emotions for these Gen Zers.
Worried, very conflicted.
Apprehensive, but I'm also excited to cast my vote.
The one thing they have in common, none are enthusiastic about their options. From the economy to abortion, these young voters say they care about a range of issues. But for some, one issue tops the list.
Like all the issues that they're talking about are important, yes, but I feel like genocide's important. It should be the most important, above all.
The most recent Israel-Hamas war has killed over 40,000 Palestinians and over 1,100 people in Israel in the last year. Protests of the war have erupted across the United States. Here in the nation's capital, Gen Z protesters call on the Biden-Harris administration to stop providing weapons to Israel. The election presents a new opportunity for these protesters.
We can use voting as a tool, we can use non-voting as a tool.
1 week before Election Day, over 70,000 people gathered in D.C. to see Vice President Kamala Harris make her closing argument. Among them were protesters giving her an ultimatum.
Until there's a ceasefire or an arms embargo, they're not going to get the votes.
The race for president is neck and neck, with Harris and Trump polling just under 50%, meaning this protest vote could potentially have an impact on the outcome of the election. But some young voters are planning to cast their ballots, just not for Harris or Trump.
I think I have a really unique opportunity to use my vote to send a message.
Lily Elkind is from Manhattan, New York, a deep blue stronghold. Elkind says she is confident that her third-party vote won't lose Harris the election, but could still show her that change can't wait.
There's pressure that it's not a given, that just because she's not Donald Trump doesn't mean that she can, get away with not pushing the envelope.
For others, not agreeing with candidates on every issue wasn't enough to keep them from voting.
As much as I did sort of want to protest vote, I realized it wasn't that simple. I couldn't have been that selfish. I have a sister, I have a mom, a lot of my friends are women. Like, abortion is a major issue for me.
Bea Barbosa, District Wire News.
Polling stations across D.C. were busy today with lines of voters running out many of the doors. Reporter Ella Robinson was blocked by police from getting inside, but found plenty of action outside.
Hi, I'm Ella Robinson. I'm here at Hardy Middle School reporting for The Wash. I've not been allowed inside the building as the DPS have said no media allowed inside, but a lot has been happening outside this morning. We have had a performance from a singer who had written a song about Kamala Harris. Cast your vote, oh America, cast your vote. We have had 2 international delegations visiting, including 49 tourists from Norway who are in America for election week to visit the polling stations and watch the results unfold live.
In Norway, we are flabbergasted. We are totally blown out by the possibility of Trump winning.
For District Wire News, I'm Ella Robinson.
We're going to turn over to Bea Barbosa for that one last look at what Maryland is looking at right now. Bea, what's going on over there?
Hi, Jane. So we're going to first take a look at the presidential race in Maryland, which the polls closed at 8 p.m., which was just a little over an hour and a half ago. And pretty much as soon as the polls closed, The AP actually did call the race for Kamala Harris, and this is something they only do when they are very, very, very confident that this election and those electoral votes will go to Kamala Harris. That means that there's about a 15% margin of error that they're sure that this state's electoral votes will go to Kamala Harris. So that is something that's a little bit interesting. It's kind of a safe blue state for Kamala Harris right now. And then as we take a look at the Maryland congressional districts, there are a few that are up for grabs this election, excuse me. And we're going to take a look at the 6th congressional district, which has a really tight race. Right now we're looking at 49% of the votes counted, and oh, excuse me, that's for the president. 49% of the votes have been counted for president. For the Maryland's 6th congressional district, we have 45% of the votes counted, and it is a very tight race. Right now, the Democrat, April McClain Delaney, is leading with 52.3% of the vote, and it's not a very close race, or it is a very close race, excuse me, with the Republican nominee, Neil Parrott, trailing at 47.7%. So still a very tight race, and this could be something to watch considering it is such a tight race in Congress, in the House, and in the Senate, and really it can go either way depending on how some of these seats go.
That wraps up our live coverage for tonight. Be sure to tune in to thewash.org for instant updates from the Associated Press all night long. Thanks so much for joining us.